one of the most conservative congressmen, Ted Yoho, says that he's a yes, but under duress. And since there are not more yay votes today, the only vote is going to be on this short-term budget measure, which may get some Democratic support because it is independent of health care and because it doesn't have any money for the wall, which conservatives don't think, but conservatives, I should say, don't think that Democrats can obstruct them for much longer.
President Trump, I think, is probably the master of leverage. And so right now the Democrats have done a couple neat little theatric moves up here on the Hill as usual, right, with a bright, shiny object with $1 billion for the wall, $1 billion out of $4 trillion budget, right? So that's your standard politics. But I think President Trump's blood pressure is probably going up.
And now some Republicans and Democrats say they are dismayed that the government is being funded at the last minute and just for a week, with some on the left accusing the majority party of having its priorities out of whack.
Maybe Republicans have been too busy trying to defund Planned Parenthood, trying to undo important consumer protections put in place by Democrats, trying to tear down common sense rules to protect public safety and the environment. Perhaps if Republicans had been responsibly working with Democratic leaders during the past 7 months, we could have already funded our government.
So we do expect this 1 week long short-term budget to be passed out of the House within the next half an hour or so. And then it's going to kick over to the Senate, where most senators are already home for the weekend. So they're going to use a trick that they can do to authorize a measure with nobody home, and then they send it over to the president where it is expected to be signed. John.
Nice to be able to do your job and not actually show up for work. Peter Doocy.
Playing hooky.
Try it sometime, Peter.
No. No, Peter, we need you. Stay there. Glenn Hall's with us, luckily, not playing hooky, U.S. News editor for the Wall Street Journal. So, Glenn, is the threat of a government shutdown over?
Yeah, I think it was closely over already. They needed this 1 week to iron out a few minor details. So that's what we're hearing from inside Congress. They weren't major sticking points. So that's why only 1 week. And then they'll get this job done. That will fund the government for another 5 months. And then we'll be back here again.
Oh, good. Something to look forward to. Why can't they get the whole thing done if they know they're going to get everything done next week and they're confident in that?
Well, sometimes the devil is in the details, and there were a few minor points that they needed to win over on a couple of compromise issues. We're told they weren't big deals, that there's going to be some additional military defense spending. There will be some additional border spending, but not wall spending. So there were a few points that still had to be ironed out. They just couldn't get it done in time ahead of the looming deadline tomorrow. So they gave themselves an extra week so they didn't have to rush into bad compromises.
So explain to our viewers then, what is the interplay between the apparently new health care deal or compromise perhaps and the spending bill that they were trying to pass? Initially they were going to try to do both things, Glenn, but apparently now they're not.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom in Washington is always that Congress can only tackle one big thing at a time. And I think really that was borne out this week. They had to get the spending done. That was crucial. That derailed them from getting the votes lined up and doing the deals that needed to be done to get a health care bill out there so that Donald Trump could have that legislative victory before his 100-day run out tomorrow. So I think it just was one of those things where better to get the votes and be sure than to face an embarrassment on the floor with legislation that doesn't pass.
I got it. Okay, so what about the health care bill now, though? For Republicans, can Republicans actually unite behind one bill?
Boy, this has been tough. We saw it already. This played out once. And we have this great compromise effort within the GOP that what we're hearing largely satisfied the Freedom Caucus, the more conservative members of the Republican Party, but then alienated more of the moderate members of the party. And that was the battle that we saw, the battle lines that we saw the first time. So now they've got to figure out if they've got the votes in order to bring some moderates in, or how can they create compromise. And as Peter Doocy was just saying, they're doing it one vote at a time rather than trying to find a solution to everybody.
Glenn, do you think this is still really a priority for Republicans, or do you think they've changed some of their thinking about repealing and replacing completely Obamacare and turning more to fixes?
Yeah, it does feel a lot like fixes, although there are some big key fundamental changes, right? No longer is there the mandate that came as part of Obamacare, and the funding mechanisms are more through tax credits. And so there are some big philosophical differences that will make it feel like a win for Republicans, even though these are changes to the core, not a total repeal and start over.
Do you see this moving next week as well as the spending bill, or do you think Republicans are a little bit further away from pushing through some new legislation?
It's hard to see that far. It's only a week away, but it's hard to see. They are working one vote at a time on the compromise for health care. I'm certain that they will be able to get the government funding sorted out. They are very close on that. But health care, I still feel that what we're hearing, there are some big divides that need to be crossed, and that may not be possible in 1 week's time.
You know, I want to just bottom line it for our viewers. So short term, our government is open for business. We still don't have a long-term spending bill passed, and we still don't have any new health care legislation. So I'm just going to sum it up as it stands right now today. As we mentioned, things can change. Glenn, we've talked, of course, almost every week of the Trump administration. What do you think what you're seeing on Congress, for Congress and on Capitol Hill? How do you think that reflects on the president? Does it reflect on the president? What have we learned about the first 100 days of the Trump administration?
Yes, it's very interesting. When we've been out reporting in the field across the nation, talking to Trump supporters and Trump opponents, also in the poll numbers, we see a lot of forgiveness to the president among his supporters and his base, saying, well, he couldn't get things done because Congress didn't work with him. And then when you look at the poll numbers, we also see House Speaker Paul Ryan very low, reflecting a lot of blame that's being placed on him for not getting the legislative agenda through Congress. So it's a mixed bag there. You know, the president's own performance approval ratings are fairly low as well, but the blame is not being put squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders.
We'll see what the next 100 days bring. The first 200 days doesn't have the same ring, you know, but we're still going to be looking forward to it. Glenn, thank you very much. Great to have you.
All right, now China is refusing to confirm statements from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson that Beijing has threatened sanctions against North Korea if the Kim regime conducts another nuclear test. But China is not denying those statements either. Benjamin Hall, following this, he joins us live from London. Benjamin.
Hi, John. And just in the last hour, Secretary Tillerson has been chairing a meeting at the UN Security Council on this very issue. And he said the same. He said China really is the key to this. They control 90% of North Korea's trade, and they have to come together with the international community and do more. But while they were there talking, North Korea continued to provoke the US, releasing more videos showing Kim Jong-un overseeing military drills. These were the combined army forces of North Korea, and they were said to be the largest ever drills carried out by that country. And this, as President Trump reiterated, that anything was still possible on the peninsula.
Well, there's a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely.
As a defense, the U.S. has now deployed the THAAD anti-missile defense system to South Korea far sooner than was originally planned. The system costs around $1 billion, and President Trump has questioned why the U.S. is paying for it, even though half of South Koreans object to its presence there. But the issue now very focused on China, and while they are reported to have sent back coal shipments recently, they are being asked to do more, something Secretary Tillerson said could possibly open the door to North Korean talks.
The regime in North Korea has to position itself in a different place in order for us to be willing to engage in talks. So we are asking a lot of the Chinese. I think in the past the assumption has been the Chinese would only take limited action. We're going to test that assumption.
And he also just said at the UN now that regime change was not the goal there. Also that the US would sanction third-party countries who helped North Korea's missile and nuclear programs, and that they were open to giving back aid to North Korea if they gave up their missile and nuclear programs. So a lot going on at the moment, and seeing how that'll pan out in the coming days. John?
And some disturbing words from the president about the possibilities. Yeah. Benjamin Hall in London, thank you.
Well, some new developments today in the so-called Fitbit murder case, with the husband accused of killing his wife back in court. Also, new questions about former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. Did he break the law? And what could that mean for the Trump administration? Greg Jarrett with his take next. Right now, some new information on a few crime stories we're watching. The state of Arkansas executing a fourth death row inmate in 8 days last night. Kenneth Williams was sentenced to death for killing a former deputy warden after escaping from prison, where he was then serving a life sentence for the murder of a college cheerleader. The man charged with murdering his wife in what's being called the Fitbit case is due in court today. Richard DeBate told police someone broke into his Connecticut home and tortured him before fatally shooting his wife. Investigators say his wife's Fitbit contradicts his timeline of events. And Illinois police have found the body of a missing 16-month-old toddler inside her home. That home was in deplorable conditions, according to authorities. The girl's mother had been under investigation for child neglect.
Well, there's no end in sight to the controversy surrounding former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. A number of government agencies are investigating General Flynn and whether he violated the law by taking payments from a foreign government and failing to disclose the information. So what could it mean for the Trump administration if it's determined Flynn broke the law? Greg Jarrett is an attorney and Fox News anchor and joins us now. So is there evidence, first of all, that he hid these payments that he received from the Russian government?
Well, he and his attorney, Flynn and his attorney, say absolutely not, that he met with Pentagon officials before he delivered the speech in Moscow, told them all about it. When he came back, he debriefed them and gave them a thumb drive, he says, which reflected documents and information, including that it was all arranged through a speakers bureau. Now, John, should have been obvious to the Pentagon that he was getting paid for the speech. Speakers bureaus don't, provide services for free speeches. Did he specifically disclose $35,000? That's unclear, and it's actually disputed. But look, if he goes to the Pentagon, tells them I'm going to do this, and they don't object to it, that is tacit approval, if not express approval, which he needs in order to give the speech.
But two members of Congress who are on the committee investigating this, Congressman Chaffetz, Congressman Cummings, opposite the political parties, they both say he might have broken the law.
Yeah, in not disclosing the money in his paperwork. Now, if that's true, then yes, it's a violation of the law, but it's a civil violation generally, and the penalty is you forfeit the $35,000, or maybe you get your retirement benefits suspended for a brief period of time. Is it also a crime? Arguably, it is a felony punishable by 5 years behind bars, but generally, prosecutors don't go after people like that because they'd have to show specific intent, that he deliberately intended to hide the money. Given his conversations with the Pentagon, that appears unlikely. And besides, the prosecutors really want to criminally charge a 3-star general for giving a speech? It seems excessive and anathema to the First Amendment free speech provisions.
We've heard a lot about the emoluments clause of the Constitution in connection with President Trump, but these congressional leaders are saying General Flynn might have violated that clause.
Yeah, the quirky emoluments clause, what is it? It means if you hold a public office, you can't receive an emolument. Problem is, the framers never defined what an emolument is. Generally, it's using your office to confer a benefit to a foreign government, like bribery. So here, what did he confer? He conferred a speech. Is that really a benefit? It probably isn't. And second of all, Flynn wasn't a government official at the time. He was retired military. The Department of Justice years ago said, well, you guys in the military who are retired, the emoluments clause should apply to you. But that's never been challenged in court, and I doubt it would hold up.
The members of Congress are fighting for some documents from the White House. The White House is balking, doesn't want to release them. Do they have to? Does the White House have to?
No, they don't. They've already said we're not going to hand over all these documents you're asking related to Flynn because they say it involves national security. He was, after all, national security advisor for a brief period of time, so that seems rather obvious. What Congress would have to do is issue a subpoena, and then the White House would probably assert executive privilege, as President Obama and other presidents have done.
Greg Jarrett, Fox News anchor, as well as attorney. Thanks for the explainer.
Good to see you, John.
You too. We are expecting any second now to get tape play out, as it's called. There it is, of President Trump signing an executive order titled implementing an America First offshore energy strategy, directing a review of the locations available for offshore oil and gas exploration. Let's listen to the president.
He will go down as a truly great vice president. Many thanks to Secretaries Wilbur Ross and Ryan Zinke. Very proud of the job they're doing. We're also pleased to welcome many members of Congress and energy industry leaders to the White House, and I want to get them immediately back over there because I know they're going to be voting on lots of different things, right? So we can't spend too much time talking about drilling in the Arctic, right? But we're opening it up. This is a great day for American workers and families, and today we're unleashing American energy and clearing the way for thousands and thousands of high-paying American energy jobs. Our country is blessed with incredible natural resources, including abundant offshore oil and natural gas reserves. But the federal government has kept 94% of these offshore areas closed for exploration and production. And when they say closed, they mean closed. This deprives our country of potentially thousands and thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in wealth. I pledged to take action, and today I am keeping that promise. This executive order starts the process of opening offshore areas to job-creating energy exploration. It reverses the previous administration's Arctic leasing ban. So hear that. It reverses the previous administration's Arctic leasing ban and directs Secretary Zinke to allow responsible development of offshore areas that will bring revenue to our Treasury and jobs to our workers. In addition, Secretary Zinke will be reconsidering burdensome regulations that slow job creation. Finally, this order will enable better scientific study of our offshore resources and research that has blocked everything from happening for far too long. You notice it doesn't get blocked for other nations. It only gets blocked for our nation. Renewed offshore energy production will reduce the cost of energy, create countless new jobs, and make America more secure and far more energy independent. This action is another historic step toward future development and future with a real future, and I have to say, that's a real future, with greater prosperity and security for all Americans, which is what we want. So I'm very proud of the people standing behind me. I'm far less proud of the people standing in front of me, the media. But I have to tell you that this is a very important day, and I want to congratulate Wilbur and Ryan and all of the people that have worked so hard to get this put together so quickly. And it's going to lead to a lot of great wealth for our country and a lot of great jobs for our country. So God bless America. Thank you very much. Big question is who's going to get this pen? I don't know.
Your future is what we say in Alaska.
Thank you. We love Alaska. I'll give it to Peter. Right here, I think. Thank you. I don't know, we're moving awfully well. We're getting a lot of things done. I don't think there's ever been anything like this. It's a false standard, 100 days, but I have to tell you, I don't think anybody has done what we've been able to do in 100 days. So we're very happy. Have a good time. Thank you.
The president signing the Implementing an America First of Offshore Energy Strategy Act, directing a review of all the locations offshore where energy might be located. You heard the president there say 94% of it has been off limits due to actions by the federal government. He wants to take another look at that. In the meantime, as you just heard the president say, he is preparing to mark his first 100 days in office, capping a week of frenetic activity from state visits to executive orders and a looming foreign policy crisis on the Korean Peninsula, all while Mr. Trump has attempted to downplay the significance of this milestone, really created by President Franklin Roosevelt. So how are the media treating the first 100 days? Let's bring in James Freeman, assistant editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal, and Kimberly Atkins, chief Washington reporter and columnist for the Boston Herald. Thanks, both of you, for being here. Kimberly, you just heard the president say that he thinks his first 100 days have been among the most successful of any president's. Do you agree?
Well, look, it depends on the measure. I think 100 days is a short period of time to try to measure progress for any new president. It's not a ton of time, and we've seen through polls that those who have, the folks who voted for President Trump still would vote for him again. They are pleased with what's happening so far, but at the same time, he hasn't really delivered on a lot of his campaign promises legislatively. A lot of the things he's done has been through executive order, or they've been through legislation called CRAs, which are a way to sort of roll back regulations that were put in place at the end of the Obama administration. But on things like building the wall, repeal and replace Obamacare, infrastructure and tax reform, we're still waiting on that. But so it shows, as he said himself yesterday, that this job is tougher than he thought.
James, Kimberly pointed to the executive orders that he signed. He has signed 29 in his first 100 days. Barack Obama signed 19, and George W. Bush signed 11. By that measure, I guess he's a pretty active president. But what about the bigger picture things?
Yeah, I think he's exceeding expectations. We knew this was a unconventional candidate last year. He'd be an unconventional president. He didn't bring in an army of sort of political hacks that many politicians bring with them to Washington. So in terms of legislation, you have to say that traditional yardstick, he's behind schedule. But you look at, I think, a pretty solid bunch of appointments, some real change agents in his cabinet. You look at, as Kimberly mentioned, now 13 Obama rules have been rolled back through that Congressional Review Act. I think you might see number 14 next week. This is progress. You look at a great tax plan. Obviously, we'll have to see 200 and 300 days whether that happens. But I think the big enchilada is the Gorsuch Supreme Court appointment, which I think for people who love constitutional governance, the rule of law, this really vindicated the decision to vote for Trump.
Yeah, Kimberly, what about, I mean, when you talk about the things that the president has or has not accomplished, what about obstruction from Democrats? I mean, we know that they deliberately dragged their feet on confirming his cabinet appointees, and a lot of cabinet department jobs are still unfilled.
Yeah, I don't think you can blame at all on the Democrats. I mean, yes, Justice Gorsuch, for example, needed the nuclear option to be installed in the Supreme Court because he was not going to get 60 votes out of the Senate. But the president has also appointed fewer people in cabinet positions. And at a time when we do have a lot, particularly on the foreign policy front, a lot of positions in the State Department are still empty right now at this crucial juncture. So part of it is a bit of a logjam, but it's also a lack of the White House has not nominated nearly as many people as its predecessors at this point.
James, you work at the Wall Street Journal, a newspaper that covers business, especially. The Wall Street has gone crazy under this president. What is it about, what he has accomplished in these 100 days that seems to have the business community so excited?
Well, it's really been about expectations. From election night till March 1st, we saw this huge run-up because of the promise of tax cuts, of deregulation. He has started to deliver on the deregulation. He needs to get that great tax plan through the Congress. But you look at that first quarter GDP report today, came out this morning, and obviously tells you how far we have to go. But if you want to look at maybe a Trump impact in there, you see finally a rise in business investment. Companies have not wanted to invest given the really terrible incentives that have been created by Washington. So let's hope that that's the beginning. But now he's got to fulfill those expectations, and that's really largely about the tax cut.
He has said, Kimberly, that this job isn't as easy as he thought it might be.
Yes, I mean, it takes, look, we've seen him use his style of negotiation, which is, part saying he's a good deal maker and part being a bit of a bully, whether it's, going on Twitter on the attack against Democrats or even members of his own party trying to advance legislation like the health care bill, which still is yet to go to a vote. And he's seeing that you can't just do that and get results in Washington the way I think he believed that you could. So we're seeing him learn on the job a little bit. We're seeing him lean on people in his cabinet and his inner circle for counsel, and you can kind of tell as he comes out on these issues who had his ear. So definitely a learning experience, a learning on the job experience for the president.
Kimberly Atkins, Boston Herald, James Freeman from the Wall Street Journal. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Happy to be here.
Well, top U.S. commander sounding the alarm on a decades-old treaty. He says it allows China to gain a nuclear edge over the U.S. We'll explain. Plus this, are Democrats learning from the 2016 election? New details on the party's postmortem and why some say Democrats are not addressing the problems that cost them the election.
A Fox News alert and sad news out of Afghanistan. The Department of Defense today is identifying the 2 Army Rangers who died yesterday in Nangarhar province, Afghanistan. Small arms fire apparently took their lives. Both soldiers from the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, Fort Benning, Georgia. The incident is still under investigation. They are Joshua P. Rogers of Bloomington, Illinois, age 22, and Sergeant Cameron H. Thomas, 23, Kettering, Ohio. Both sergeants, both lost their lives in Afghanistan. Our hearts and our prayers to their families.
A top U.S. commander says the White House should renegotiate a decades-old arms treaty that's allowed China to develop a huge advantage over the U.S. in stockpiling short and medium-range nuclear missiles. Leland Vitter is live at the Pentagon with more on this story. Leland?
Well, Jenna, the issue here is that the United States is playing by the rules, and leaders here at the Pentagon say that is putting us in real danger. North Korea, Iran, and China never signed this treaty, and Russia, well, they're ignoring it.
How many of China's land-based missile forces do you estimate have a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers?
In an unclassified venue, Senator, over 90% fall in that range.
And how many missiles do you have that fall into that range?
I have none, sir.
And they are talking specifically about short and medium-range land-based missiles that can attack targets between 300 and 3,000 miles away. Most importantly, these missiles can carry nuclear weapons.
I do think we should look at renegotiating the treaty. We should consider that because, as you say, there's only 2 countries that signed on to it, and one of them doesn't follow it. That becomes a unilateral limitation on us.
And that limitation is becoming very real given the current circumstances. Up until 1991, the United States had these short-range tactical nuclear weapons based in South Korea. Now leaders here at the Pentagon are having to make their war plans without those missiles, and for that matter, Jenna, having to make contingency plans without their deterrent value, which something could perhaps be useful right now on the Korean Peninsula.
Leland, thank you.
Well, some Democrats accuse party leaders of burying a post-mortem on the 2016 election loss. The autopsy reportedly was presented during a members-only meeting with about 24 lawmakers in attendance. According to Politico, the report focused on fundraising, not messaging. Joining us now, the authors of Shattered: Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. Thanks, both of you, for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
So this post-mortem, Amy, what do you know about it?
The postmortem, as you said, focuses on fundraising, but as we report in our book, it was so much more complicated than that. It was messaging. There was never any hierarchy in the campaign. There was a shuffling around of aides. There were a lot of problems internally, and also, she became the inevitable candidate again, and I think that was something that really haunted her. She was kind of a mismatched candidate for the times.
And Jonathan, when you look at the two campaigns, it always seemed like the Trump campaign was the one that was constantly shuffling advisors, bringing in a new manager, that kind of thing. According to your book, it was Hillary Clinton's campaign that really suffered from leadership problems.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well for President Trump, I think. Secretary Clinton had all sorts of internal problems that weren't aired. A lot of people on her campaign were afraid to talk to reporters, afraid of being accused of leaking things. I think it's fascinating that House Democrats don't want their report to get out, don't want people to be able to analyze it. Doesn't seem particularly good strategy for the long term. And we've heard some of that echo about this book that we've written, that there are some Democrats that don't want you to read it, which doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of trying to look at the future and how that party can rebuild itself after a devastating loss.
One of the problems you go into, Amy, and you touched on it before, is just the fact that Hillary Clinton was not able to articulate why she deserved the office.
Right, and that stemmed from, early in the beginning, she actually had those problems on her launch speech. When aides gathered, she invited outside advisors in, including one Obama speechwriter, and at the end of the process, he kind of got so frustrated that he couldn't carry on anymore because there was no real message. It could have been given by any Democratic. It was like your typical stump speech. And that was problematic for her. When people inside the campaign don't really know what it is, what the big idea is, that's a problem.
Jonathan, what about I just lost my train of thought completely. But Elizabeth Warren played a role in this whole campaign, sort of shadowing Hillary and caused some problem for the campaign.
Well, she became an attack mechanism against Donald Trump, and some people thought she was pretty effective at that. The interesting story that we tell about Elizabeth Warren in this book is that Hillary Clinton was very dissatisfied with her short list of vice presidential candidates. At the time, it was Tim Kaine, it was New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, and she really didn't like it. She told her aides, this is not thrilling me. And as a result, Elizabeth Warren made sort of a late run into that short list. Ultimately, Secretary Clinton decided, according to our sources, that she just couldn't trust that Elizabeth Warren would be on her team in the White House. They didn't have enough of a background of working together, as it was put to us. They hadn't conducted enough transactions together, and the Obama White House had warned a little bit against Elizabeth Warren because she had sometimes gone out on a populist streak against them, perhaps having a little bit better feel for where the public was than the Obama White House or the Clinton campaign.
Amy, I just remembered the question I was going to throw to Jonathan, so I'll throw it to you. And that has to do with being dismissive of Donald Trump. I mean, from the moment he announced, everybody was saying this guy could never be president. Was there some of that feeling in the Clinton camp?
I think there was, and early on we detail in the book that there was a memo put out by a Clinton advisor who basically said, fact, Donald Trump can become president of the United States. This was a memo that I don't think ever gained much traction. While they did take him seriously, I think towards the end they thought that they had it. They thought that, they had everything going from them, from surrogates. President Obama was on the trail for them. They had the infrastructure. They had everything really in their favor, financial backing. And so I think in some ways, maybe in the back of their mind, they did take him for granted.
The new book is Shattered: Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign. Those are the authors, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Well, new developments in what can easily be described as a PR nightmare for United Airlines, a real nightmare for the passenger, right? After he was forcibly removed from a flight and a video of the incident was seen around the world. Plus, closing in on the 100-day mark for the Trump presidency, where exactly did that benchmark originate? A presidential historian joins us live with some interesting news that's ahead.
Outside Washington, D.C., there's the Marine One helicopter touching down with the president on board. He'll be boarding Air Force One to take the flight down to Atlanta, where today For the first time in close to 40 years, the president will be addressing the National NRA Convention, the National Rifle Association Convention, the first president to do so since Ronald Reagan in 1983. When the president speaks to the NRA, we will have it for you live here on Fox.
We've heard it a million times already, but tomorrow marks 100 days since President Trump took the oath of office. It's traditionally been a benchmark to assess our leaders, but one has to wonder, we know it's a tradition, right? But where does that tradition actually come from? Doug Weed is a presidential historian. He joins us now for more on that. I was reading into this, Doug, and I said, we have to talk to Doug Weed because I see that this tradition could go back even to Napoleon, but I'd like you to bring us just to the U.S. Where did the first 100 days reference emerge?
You know, it happened in the White House when FDR was giving a speech to the nation, a fireside chat. His mother, Sarah Delano, was sitting there with him. It's what today is a diplomatic reception room, and that was used as the radio studio. And FDR gave a speech to the nation and referred to the 100 days, not of his administration, but of the 73rd Congress. But that started the whole process, and we've had to live with it ever since.
Now, if memory serves me correctly, FDR had an amazing amount of legislation actually passed in the first 100 days. And so oftentimes he's the one that set the mark for the efficient 100 days of a presidency.
Well, that's true, but, you know, as a historian, I like to step back and look at the forest, not just the trees, and I can tell you LBJ had a spectacular, maybe the best first 100 days, but by the time his term was over, there were tanks in the street, there were neighborhoods in 120 cities that had burned to the ground. He was so unpopular he couldn't even run for office. Jimmy Carter had a spectacular 100 days. Nobody wants to go back to 15% inflation. So sometimes the metrics of the first 100 days are more cosmetic than they are real.
You know, that's such a great reminder for us, some important context, because one wonders, you know, what does this first 100 days actually mean for what we're going to see in the next 3 years plus? Is there any way to look at the 100 days as some sort of a predictor, Doug, or does it just not work?
Well, you know, using what I learned in my book, Game of Thorns, and the ideas that Trump had, he's hitting home runs. He's turned around the economy, he's turned around illegal immigration, and he's turned around the Supreme Court. And those were the three things that the people who voted for him wanted. And it's why there's 94 to 96% of them still support him and approve of what he's doing, because he's turned those things around. And he's done it without legislation, like Reagan just spoke and the Berlin Wall came down.
Well, it's interesting. You know that critics, though, will say, and we're seeing it in newspapers across the country, and I'm sure our viewers will hear it, they'll hear what the media will report, which is this president has no major legislation to his name in the first 100 days. I mean, we'll report that because it's actually a fact. Others will try to use it as a way to say this presidency is going one way or the other. To you, you're giving us a different picture, though, of the Trump presidency. Why are you relying on these other metrics rather than the legislative ones?
Well, because of history, I can reverse the illustrations I used. I could talk about Ronald Reagan, who had no major legislation in his first 100 days. He sat up in his pajamas in bed and signed the only legislation, which was a limit on dairy supports. He had been shot during that first 100 days. I could use as an example John F. Kennedy, whose first 100 days were a disaster. There was the Bay of Pigs. There was the summit in Vienna with Nikita Khrushchev that led almost to a nuclear war. He really stumbled out of the gate. And yet both presidencies, Reagan and Kennedy, are admired presidents, and their presidencies were popular. So that's where
That's interesting. That's so interesting. I mean, I thought our conversation would go in a lot of directions. I didn't think it would go to Reagan's pajamas. But that's really interesting to think both the Republican and the Democrat had an interesting experience within the first 100 days, and yet they're remembered by the American public and others as some of our great presidents. I just want to point out something, Doug, that speaks to what a president learns sometimes during their presidency. I remember when President Trump first boarded Air Force One, and during one of his first trips, he didn't turn around and wave. And that's part of a tradition of itself, that you're supposed to stand up there, you wave, and then you go into the plane. And he did it now. And to me, that's almost a microcosm of things that are learned within the first 100 days. What has stood out most to you, again, with someone with such historical depth?
Yeah, that's very true what you said. And, you know, Bill Clinton, one of the complaints about Bill Clinton is he didn't salute. And that went on for months. And finally someone said, Mr. President, you're supposed to salute back. He said, why? I'm the commander in chief. So, yeah, it's a learning curve for anybody elevated to the highest office in the land. And I think Donald Trump's rough edges are kind of reassuring to those of us who wanted to see an out-of-the-box president who will make some substantial changes to the corruption that our government seems to have found itself in.
Very interesting perspective, as always, Doug. We appreciate you joining us. Look forward to having you back. Thank you very much. Again, Air Force One about to depart for the big speech the president will give today at the NRA. John?
And again, we will have that for you live. Some potentially huge revelations for historians and conspiracy theorists on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Why thousands of secret government documents could soon be released. Let's check out what's coming up on Outnumbered. Top of the hour. Sandra and Harris, what do you have?
Hey, John. Well, we are just a day now away from President Trump's big 100-day milestone. As new Fox polling shows, voters strongly believe he is sticking to his America First agenda.
Also, former President Obama continues to face criticism over that $400,000 payday for a Wall Street speech. Now, one of the biggest names in the Democratic Party is speaking out against it.
All that plus our hashtag one lucky guy in a very special edition of Outnumbered. Top of the hour.
Monumental show.
We will explain why.
Yay.
Looking forward to it. See you then.
Thank you.
Well, this just in. British police say they've disrupted an active terror plot in London. Authorities conducting raids that led to at least 6 arrests. They also say a woman was shot and seriously wounded in the operation. Kitty Logan is live from London with more. Kitty?
Hi, Jenna. That's right. London police say they've managed to disrupt a major terror plot which was ongoing. Now, 5 of those suspects were detained overnight during a raid at a London home. They're now being held on terror charges. One woman was shot and injured by police during that raid. She's now in hospital in a stable condition, and a 6th person was arrested in southeast England. Now, police say they've been watching that house as part of an anti-terrorism investigation. They're now confident they have been able to prevent an attack. Over 250 suspects have been arrested on terror offences in the last year alone in the UK, and police continue to monitor hundreds of others. Now, one of those under police surveillance was Khalid Mohammed Omar Ali, who was detained yesterday, if you remember, for attempting a terror attack in central London. He was stopped close to the Prime Minister's office and to Parliament, carrying knives in a bag. Police say this incident was not connected to last night's arrest. But just remember, last month, a man stabbed to death a policeman outside Parliament after he drove across the bridge, killing 4 people. The threat level here in the UK does remain at severe. Jenna.
Kitty, thank you.
We are continuing to watch the president as he gets ready to head down to Atlanta and address the National Rifle Association. You just saw Air Force One ready to take off. President Trump will be the first president to do so since Ronald Reagan in 1983. In our second hour, we expect to have his remarks for you live.